The Varek Dominion had not lost a war in 400 years. That was not an exaggeration. It was a fact carved into the victory monuments on 17 conquered worlds. It was a number recited by Varek children before they learned to walk. 4 centuries of unbroken expansion, unbroken dominance, unbroken will. Their fleet numbered 80,000 warships. Not patrol craft, not escorts. 80,000 capital-class vessels, each one larger than any human city that had ever existed. Their smallest destroyer carried enough firepower to crack a moon. Their flagship, the Eternal Dominion, stretched 40 kilometers from bow to stern and had never once retreated from a battlefield. The Varek did not believe in retreat. They believed in consumption. Every civilization they had ever encountered had ended the same way. First came the scouts, then the diplomats carrying impossible demands, then when those demands were refused, and they were always refused because the demands were designed to be refused, came the fleet. What followed was not a war, it was a harvest. Systems stripped of resources, populations relocated to labor facilities, cultures erased within a generation. The Varek did not destroy for sport. They destroyed because destruction was efficient, because a conquered species that remembered pride was a species that eventually rebelled, and rebellion wasted time. They had perfected the process. 47 civilizations had passed through that process. 47 peoples who had once looked up at the stars with hope now looked down at assembly floors. Their languages were gone. Their histories were gone. Even their names for themselves were gone, replaced by Varek administrative designations, Labor Class 7, Extraction Unit 12, Processing Cohort 3. The 48th civilization on the Varek list was called Humanity. The Dominion's Expansion Committee had reviewed the file, unremarkable by their standards, a single star system, 1 habitable world, partially terraformed second planet, 3 orbital stations of modest construction, population 11 billion, military capability, classified as Class 4 resistance, meaning they would fight, they would lose, and the process would take approximately 14 months from first contact to full integration. 14 months was considered fast work. The committee approved the expansion order on a Tuesday. They did not expect a response. The Varek diplomatic vessel entered the Sol system on March 14, 2387. It was not a subtle arrival. The ship was 3 kilometers long, painted in the deep violet of Varek imperial authority and broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. The message was the same one they had broadcast to 47 other civilizations. It had been translated into the target language by Varek linguistic processors in under 6 hours. It was designed to be understood immediately, completely, and without ambiguity. The Varek Dominion extends this civilization the honor of consideration. Surrender of all military assets, orbital infrastructure, and resource extraction rights will be completed within 30 standard cycles. Compliance ensures the continuation of your biological population. Noncompliance ensures the opposite. This message will not be repeated. It was, by any measure, a masterpiece of intimidation. 11 billion humans read it within the hour. The response from the United Earth Assembly arrived 9 hours later. The Varek diplomatic AI processed the communication, flagged 2 anomalies, and forwarded the full text to Supreme Commander Veth aboard the Eternal Dominion, currently stationed at the edge of the Varek frontier, 43 light-years from Earth. Veth read the human response twice. Then he read it a 3rd time because he wanted to be certain he had not made an error. The humans had declined. That was expected. Every civilization declined. What was not expected was the tone of the declination. There were no pleas, no negotiations, no counteroffers, no expressions of fear or desperation or the kind of existential panic that the Varek ultimatum was specifically engineered to produce. The humans had simply written back with the bureaucratic calm of an organization that had already made its decision and had no further questions about it. The United Earth Assembly has received your transmission. We decline your terms. We would further advise that any military action taken against human-controlled space will be met with a comprehensive and proportional response. We suggest you reconsider your expansion trajectory. This is the only communication you will receive from us on this matter. Veth set down the document. He looked at his war council. 8 admirals of the Varek Imperial Fleet, each one a veteran of campaigns that had shattered interstellar alliances and brought species older than human civilization to their knees. They looked back at him with the same expression. A confusion and something be. Neath the confusion that Veth would later recognize as the first tremor of a very large mistake. A Class 4 resistance, Veth said. A Class 4, his senior admiral confirmed. Veth ordered the fleet assembled. All of it. Not because the humans required it. Class 4 civilizations never required the full fleet, but the response had bothered him in a way he could not articulate. The humans had not sounded afraid. 47 civilizations had sounded afraid. Fear was the appropriate response to the Varek ultimatum. It was the response the ultimatum was designed to produce. Fear made the processing faster. Fear made populations compliant. The humans had sounded like they were waiting for something. Veth dismissed the feeling. He had built a career on not flinching from the unfamiliar. The humans were Class 4. They had one star system, 11 billion people, and a military capability that his analysts had assessed as technologically inferior to the Varek standard by approximately 60 years. 60 years of technological gap was not a war. It was a formality. He gave the order to advance. The Varek fleet crossed into human-controlled space on April 9, 2387. It was a sight that had ended civilizations. 12,000 warships in the vanguard alone, not the full 80,000, but more than enough. Veth had not survived 4 centuries of Dominion expansion by being reckless. He sent 12,000. He kept 68,000 in reserve. He expected to recall the reserve within the week after the humans had seen the vanguard and reconsidered their position. What he found at the edge of the Sol system was not what he expected. There were no human ships. The long-range sensors showed nothing. No defensive fleet, no blockade, no massed formation of warships scrambled to meet the incoming threat. The Varek vanguard advanced through empty space, and for 3 days nothing happened. No communication, no resistance, no movement at all from the inner system. Veth's analysts revised their assessment. They are retreating, his senior admiral said, pulling their forces back to defend the homeworld directly, a final stand. It was the rational conclusion. It was also wrong. On the 4th day, the Varek vanguard reached the outer marker buoys, automated navigation beacons placed at the system's edge by early human space exploration, 3 centuries old, broadcasting gentle positional data. Standard procedure would have been to destroy them. They were enemy infrastructure. Veth ordered them left intact. He wanted the humans watching. He wanted them to see his fleet cross their threshold and know that nothing they had built could stop it. The first engagement came 20 hours later, at a point that human star charts labeled the Proxima Relay Station, a modest communications hub orbiting a small outer system asteroid. It was crewed by 40 humans and defended by 3 light patrol vessels, the kind of ships that Varek destroyers could vaporize without breaking formation. The patrol vessels did not run. They attacked. Veth watched the engagement on his command display with the dispassion of a man who had seen this before. Small ships charging large ones, suicidal bravery, the analysts called it. He called it inefficiency. 3 human ships against 12,000 of his. The math was obscene. The patrol vessels fired twice each before the return fire reached them, and then they were gone, 3 small flashes in the dark. But the shots they fired were not what the analysts expected. The weapons were wrong. Not wrong in their effect, they had no meaningful effect on Varek destroyer shielding, as predicted, wrong in their type. The Varek weapons analysts reviewed the data in real time and flagged the anomaly within minutes. The human weapons were not plasma-based, as the six-decade technology gap assessment had predicted. They were not missile-based either, or kinetic crown-based, or any of the 12 standard weapon categories that the Dominion used to classify non-Varek civilizations. They were something else. The analysts ran the data 3 times. The results came back the same each time. The human patrol vessels had fired compressed gravitational shear weapons, technology that the Varek had been theoretically developing for 30 years and had never successfully miniaturized below the scale of a capital ship. The weapons had been mounted on ships the size of Varek patrol craft. Veth looked at the weapons data for a long time. "How many patrol vessels does the human military maintain?" he asked. His logistics officer checked the pre-war intelligence assessment. Approximately 4,000, Supreme Commander. Veth did not respond immediately. He was thinking about 40 humans in a communications station, 3 patrol ships, and weapons that should not exist. "Continue the advance," he said. His voice was steady, his hands were not. What the Varek did not know was the date of first contact. It's not April 9th, 2387, that was the date the Varek fleet crossed into the system. Not March 14th, when the diplomatic vessel arrived. The real first contact had occurred 41 years earlier in 2346 when a Varek scout probe the size of a human fist, nearly invisible, broadcasting on frequencies no human instrument had ever monitored, had slipped through the outer edge of the solar system and spent 18 months mapping everything it could see. Humanity had detected it on day 3. The probe had been built to be undetectable by Class 4 civilizations. It had not been built to be undetectable by a civilization that had been quietly redesignating itself, in the classified archives of every major government on Earth, in documents that never appeared in public records or official military inventories, as a Class 1 threat response civilization for the better part of a century. The probe was tracked, it was allowed to complete its survey, it was never interfered with. Because humanity wanted the Varek to have that data. The intelligence assessment the Varek Expansion Committee had reviewed, the one classifying Earth as a Class 4 resistant civilization with a 60-year technology gap, was accurate. It was accurate for the year 2346, when the probe had conducted its survey. In 2346, humanity had not yet deployed the gravitational shear weapons, had not yet completed the deep system fortifications, had not yet launched the 340 drone carrier vessels currently holding station behind Jupiter's magnetic shadow, had not yet seeded the asteroid belt with 17,000 autonomous defense platforms disguised as mining infrastructure. In 2346, the assessment was correct. Humanity had spent 41 years ensuring it would never be correct again. The program had a name, but the name was classified above the level of any sitting government official except the Secretary of Defense and the Chief of the Unified Military Command. Publicly, the budget lines that funded it were distributed across 40 separate ministries under descriptions like infrastructure maintenance, deep space research, and geological survey operations. The actual project had consumed more resources than every other human military program combined, for 4 decades, without a single public disclosure. It was called Project Threshold. The premise was simple. Humanity had been watching the stars long enough to know that the galaxy was not empty. It had been watching long enough to know that some of what was out there was not friendly. And it had made a decision, quietly and collectively and without any particular fanfare, that when the threat arrived, and it would arrive, humanity would not be caught unprepared. Not again, never again. The last time humanity had been caught unprepared, the result had been 2 world wars and a century of recovery. That was the lesson the species had carried into space. Not the lesson of victory, the lesson of cost. The gravitational shear weapons on those 3 patrol vessels had been built in 2361. They had been sitting in a depot on Europa for 26 years, waiting for a war that everyone hoped would never come. The war had come, and the patrol vessels were not the surprise. They were the announcement. When Veth's fleet crossed the outer marker and made contact, a signal propagated through the solar system at light speed, touching every relay station, every deep space sensor array, every hidden installation that Project Threshold had spent 4 decades building and burying and waiting. The signal had one word. The threshold. 340 drone carrier vessels came out of Jupiter's shadow. Each one launched 400 drones. Each drone carried the gravitational shear weapon in a miniaturized form that humanity's weapons engineers had been refining for 30 years. 136,000 drones, moving at velocities the Varek fleet had never tracked before because no enemy had ever moved at those velocities before, materialized on Varek long-range sensors like a wall of light. They were not aimed at the fleet. They were aimed at the space around the fleet. The gravitational shear weapon at full output did not destroy ships. It did something more precise. It compressed the local gravitational gradient into a series of intersecting shear planes, invisible, instantaneous, geometrically perfect, that made faster-than-light travel in the affected region impossible. Not difficult, not risky, impossible. The mathematics of FTL drive operation required stable gravitational geometry. Shear planes broke that geometry at the quantum level. The Varek Vanguard 12,000 warships had just become 12,000 ships that could not leave. Veth understood this 9 seconds after it happened. He immediately ordered the jump drives activated. They did not activate. His communications to the main fleet, to the 68,000 ships waiting at the system's edge, were received. The reply came back without delay. The main fleet's jump drives were also non-functional. The drone swarm had not targeted the Vanguard. It had targeted the entire system entry corridor, a volume of space 40 light-minutes wide, the only viable approach vector to the Sol system from Varek space. The 12,000 ships trapped inside. The 68,000 ships trapped outside. And between them, moving at velocities that should have been physically impossible for ships of their size. The first elements of the human battle fleet were appearing on sensors. Not patrol vessels. Warships. The UES Resolute was the largest warship humanity had ever constructed. It was also the 73rd largest warship in the human fleet, 60 meters shorter than the Eternal Dominion by boat-astern measurement, roughly equivalent in crew complement. In terms of weapons loadout, shield geometry, and drive output, there was no comparison available, because humanity had built its warships without reference to any other species. They had built them in response to threat assessments, to projected engagement scenarios, to 40 years of reverse engineering every probe and artifact and transmission that had ever reached the solar system from Varek space. They had built them to fight the Varek specifically. Supreme Commander Veth did not know this. He could not have known this. The Varek had never encountered a civilization that built its military in direct preparation for fighting the Dominion. They had always arrived as the first contact. They had always arrived before preparation was possible. They had arrived 41 years too late. The human fleet that emerged from the inner system numbered 2,900 warships. Against 12,000 Varek vessels in the Vanguard, the ratio was unfavorable on paper. Veth saw the numbers and felt something he had not felt in 400 years of Dominion military service. He felt the calculation failed. Because the numbers did not account for the drones. 136,000 drones, each one carrying a weapon that the Varek had no countermeasure for, because the Varek had never successfully miniaturized the gravitational shear weapon, had never deployed it in drone configuration, and had never encountered it used as a denial field rather than a direct weapon. The Varek shield geometries were optimized for plasma, kinetic, and energy beam defense. They had never been tested against gravitational shear. The first combat engagement between the human fleet and the Varek vanguard lasted 11 minutes. It was not a battle, it was a lesson. The human ships did not close to direct engagement range. They held station at distances that should have made their weapons ineffective. Distances the Varek fleet had never needed to defend against because no weapons platform humanity had previously deployed could reach them at that range. The gravitational shear weapons in capital ship configuration did not have the same property as the denial field drones. At capital ship scale, fully powered, they did not disrupt jump drive geometry. They disrupted physical geometry. Matter in the path of a full-output capital ship gravitational shear beam experienced what human physics called a coherence failure, a breakdown of the quantum binding forces that held physical matter in stable configuration. It was not an explosion. It was not vaporization. It was closer to the matter simply deciding to stop being matter and becoming a brief, spectacular cloud of subatomic particles that dispersed at the speed of light. The first Varek destroyer to experience this described it to no one. It was gone in 0.003 seconds. Varek tactical doctrine immediately called for dispersal, spread the fleet, reduce the targeting efficiency of enemy fire. It was the correct response to any massed engagement. Varek admirals had been executing dispersal patterns since before humanity invented writing. The dispersal pattern brought them into the drone field. The drones were not weapons platforms. They were geometric tools. Each one maintained a specific position within the denial field, sustaining the gravitational shear planes that blocked jump drive operation. When Varek ships moved through the field, the drones moved with them not to attack but to maintain containment geometry, to keep the field stable, to ensure that wherever the Varek ships went within the engagement zone, they remained engaged. 60 Varek destroyers attempted to push through the drone field at full thrust. 43 of them made it through the field without triggering a shear plane. Those 43 ships cleared the drone containment boundary. They had their jump drives back. They had an escape route. They did not use it because they turned around. Veth watched it happen in real time and did not understand it for 4 seconds. Then he understood. The crews of those 43 ships had turned around because the... Why were Varek? Because the Varek did not retreat. Because the doctrine was 4 centuries old and ran deeper than survival instinct. Because the Varek military had been built on the absolute certainty that there was no enemy worth retreating from. Those 43 ships closed back into the engagement zone and were gone within 7 minutes. The human fleet did not pursue the ones that chose to leave. There were 9 of them, 9 Varek warships that broke doctrine, pushed through the drone field and ran. Veth watched them go. He did not order them court-martialed. He filed the observation away with the same quiet precision that he had been applying to every impossible thing he had seen since entering this system. The human fleet was allowing ships to escape. Not out of mercy, out of intention. Veth requested a communications channel. He had not expected the request to be granted. Civilizations that were winning military engagements rarely stopped to talk. Talking was what losing civilizations did when they were calculating their next surrender. The channel opened within 40 seconds. The human on the other end was a woman. She wore a uniform that Veth's translation systems identified as equivalent to a Supreme Commander's rank. She was seated at a command console, and she looked like someone who had been waiting for this conversation for a long time. Supreme Commander Veth, she said. I am Commander General Yara Osai of the United Earth Defense Command. You have trapped my fleet, Veth said. He did not waste time on diplomatic framing. We have contained your vanguard, she said. The main fleet is also contained, though outside the system. They cannot jump. They cannot advance past the denial field perimeter. They have sufficient life support for approximately 4 standard cycles. 4 cycles, Veth ran the numbers, she was correct. He had been in this system for less than a day. His fleet had not resupplied. If the denial field held for 4 cycles, 68,000 warships would begin running critical shortages. What do you want? He asked. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he could not categorize. It was not triumph. It was not anger. It was something quieter than either of those things. I want you to understand what you walked into, she said. Veth said nothing. Your probe entered our system in 2346, she said. We tracked it from day 3. We allowed it to complete its survey. We allowed you to bring that assessment back to your expansion committee and classify us as Class 4 resistance. We allowed you to plan your campaign, mobilize your fleet, and cross into our system. We allowed all of it. The word allowed landed in the room like something physical. You spent 40 years preparing for this engagement, Veth said. 41, she said. We wanted the margin. He looked at his command display. 2,900 human warships, 136,000 drones, 17,000 asteroid belt platforms that had not yet engaged and which his analysts were now reassessing as something considerably more dangerous than mining infrastructure. The gravitational shear denial field, the technology that should not exist at the scale it was operating. 41 years of preparation for one engagement. Why? He asked, not strategically. The strategy was clear. He meant something else. He meant, why this scale? Why this completeness? Why does a species with 11 billion people spend 4 decades building a military capable of neutralizing the most powerful fleet in the known galaxy and then wait? Oh, she understood the question. 47 civilizations, she said. We know about them. We found the records in deep space signal archives. Radio waves travel, Supreme Commander. Your victory broadcasts reach us eventually. We have been listening to your expansion for 160 years. Veth was quiet. 47 peoples, she said. Gone. We studied every one of them, every signal they broadcast before the end. We built a history of what the Dominion does from first contact to final integration. We built a complete picture of how you operate, what you expect, how you respond to each phase of resistance. She paused. Then we built something designed to break every one of those expectations. Well, the Class 4 assessment, Veth said, was real, she said. In 2346, it was accurate. We were Class 4. We were exactly what your probe recorded. She leaned forward slightly. We just had 41 years to stop being Class 4. He thought about the 9 ships he had watched escape. He thought about the fact that the human fleet had not pursued them. He thought about the 4 cycles of life support margin she had mentioned with such precision. You are going to release my fleet, he said. It was not a question, he understood now. We are going to release your fleet, she said, all of it. The Vanguard, the main body, every ship in the system, and very ship at the perimeter. We are going to shut down the denial field and let you jump. Why? Because we want you to go home, she said. We want you to bring the data from this engagement back to your expansion committee. We want them to review every weapons readout, every tactical record, every piece of sensor data from today. We want them to see exactly what we built and exactly what we are capable of. She looked at him directly. And then we want them to make a decision about whether expanding toward human space is something the Dominion wants to continue pursuing. Veth understood. They were not releasing the fleet out of mercy or goodwill. They were releasing the fleet because the fleet was the message. 80,000 Varek warships returning home with the tactical record of this engagement was worth more than 80,000 destroyed warships. The living told stories. The dead were simply absent. They wanted the Dominion to know. They wanted every civilization that the Dominion had ever threatened or conquered or considered for its list to eventually hear what had happened today in the Sol system. They wanted the story to travel at light speed in all directions, reaching every relay and every archive and every species that still had eyes to read it. They wanted to become a fact. Not a threat, not a warning, a fact. Humanity was here. Humanity was ready. Humanity had been ready for 41 years. And when the most powerful fleet in the known galaxy had crossed the line, humanity had not destroyed it. Humanity had held it, demonstrated its capability, and sent it home. Because destroying the fleet would only matter to the Dominion. Sending it home would matter to everyone who had ever feared the Dominion. Veth looked at Commander General Osai for a long moment. "You planned for the political outcome," he said, "not just the military outcome." "We planned for everything," she said. "We had 41 years." The denial field dropped at 400 hours, Sol Standard Time on April 11, 2387. The Varek Vanguard jumped within seconds. The precision of it, every ship simultaneously the moment the field collapsed, told Veth something he had not expected to find in a defeated fleet. Discipline. They had held their discipline through 2 days of containment, through watching their destroyers disappear in 0.003-second flashes, through the complete and systematic dismantling of every assumption they had carried into this system. They were still Varek. They were still soldiers. They just were not soldiers who had ever faced this before. Veth's own ship jumped last. Protocol, the commander did not leave until the fleet was clear. He stood at his command console as the Sol system fell away, as the alien star and its single blue planet and its rings of hidden weapons and its shadow fleet receded into the jump corridor, and he thought about 41 years. He thought about 47 civilizations. He thought about a species that had found a probe in 2346 and had said nothing, done nothing visible, given no sign at all that they had found it, that had simply kept watching, kept listening, kept building for 4 decades in absolute silence. That was not the behavior of a species that was afraid. That was the behavior of a species that was patient. There was a difference. Veth had built a career on understanding the difference. Fear made civilizations react. Patience made civilizations prepare. The 47 civilizations the Dominion had consumed had all reacted. They had scrambled their fleets when the scouts arrived. They had broadcast desperate communications when the diplomatic ultimatum was delivered. They had massed their defenses at the most obvious choke points and had been flanked or overwhelmed or simply outmatched. They had spent their energy on reactions. Humanity had spent 41 years on something else. The jump completed, the Sol system vanished. Varek space surrounded them again, familiar and vast, and for the first time in 4 centuries insufficient. Veth drafted his report to the Dominion Expansion Committee while the stars of home settled around him. He wrote it with the precision that a career of military service demanded, without embellishment or emotional language, in the formal register of a supreme commander delivering a tactical assessment. He described the weapons. He described the drone deployment. He described the denial field geometry and the capital ship shear projectors and the 17,000 asteroid belt platforms that his analysts had, by the end, assessed as capable of sustained engagement against forces 50 times the size of the Vanguard. He described the 9 ships that had broken doctrine and run, and the fact that the human fleet had not pursued them. He described the communications channel and the conversation with Commander General Yara Osa, and the 41 years and the 47 civilizations. He described in the flat language of a tactic. Al report the moment when he had understood that humanity had not won this engagement on April 9th. They had won it in 2346, when they had watched the probe complete its survey and said nothing. He filed the report. He did not expect the expansion committee to change course immediately. Organizations of that scale and that age did not change course immediately. There would be debate and analysis and political maneuvering, and a period of 6 to 12 cycles during which various factions would argue for alternative approaches. But they would read the reports, and the sensor data would be what it was. And gradually, not overnight, but gradually, the way that facts worked, the calculation would shift. 48 civilizations on the list. Humanity had been number 48. It was, Veth thought as his ship moved deeper into Verk space, probably going to be the last number on the list that anyone would ever put there. The report reached the Dominion Expansion Committee in 11 days. The committee convened in emergency session. The session lasted 6 days. The full tactical record from the Sol engagement was reviewed by 73 senior analysts, 14 weapons specialists, and 9 commanders with more than a century of field experience between them. The analysts produced a comprehensive assessment. The weapons specialists produced a counter-capability report. The commanders produced operational recommendations. All 3 documents reached the same conclusion. The committee issued no public statement. But the expansion order for human space was quietly, without announcement or explanation, reclassified. It moved from active expansion, the category that 68 of the Dominion's current territorial targets occupied, to a new category that had not existed in the Verk administrative system before. The category had no official name. In informal usage within the committee's own internal communications, it was referred to simply as the line. It meant this is where we do not go. The tactical record from the Sol engagement was not kept classified. The Verk had not intended it to be distributed. They had not intended any of it. But information moved in the galaxy the way that light moved at its own pace through every medium available to it without asking permission. Signal archives picked it up. Deep space relay stations forwarded it. Species that had never had diplomatic contact with either humanity or the Verk received fragmented, partial versions of the data and reconstructed what they could from what arrived. Within 30 years, the story of April 9th, 2387 had reached 41 of the 47 civilizations that the Verk had consumed and broken and designated as labor classifications. It reached them in labor facilities and on extraction worlds and in processing cohorts, where the people who had once been something else now worked assembly lines. It reached them as a fact. One system, one star, one species with 11 billion people and 41 years of patience, and the most powerful fleet in the known galaxy had turned around. The reactions to that fact were varied and complex and played out over decades and are a different story, but the fact itself was simple. It had been sent home. The fleet had been sent home. In the Sol system, life continued. The asteroid belt platforms remained active. The drone carriers remained on station. The deep system installations that Project Threshold had built over 4 decades were maintained by rotating crews who took the assignment seriously and quietly and without ceremony. The denial field technology was improved. The shear projectors were upgraded. New systems were added. New capabilities were developed. The program did not stop just because the engagement had ended. The program would never stop. That was the lesson humanity had taken from the 47, not the lesson of power, the lesson of continuity, the lesson that safety was not a destination you reached and then rested at. It was a practice, a daily commitment, a choice made every morning by every crew on every installation in the network that Project Threshold had built. The choice to be ready. Commander General Yara Osa retired 7 years after the Sol engagement. At her retirement ceremony, she gave a brief address. It was not broadcast publicly. The attendees were military personnel, defense officials, and the representatives of the Threshold program installations. The speech was 11 minutes long and covered, in broad terms, the history of Project Threshold, the strategic philosophy that had guided it, and the people who had built it over 4 decades. The final line of the speech was not in the official record. It was remembered by those who heard it and passed down, and eventually became something that the military communities of the Sol system repeated in the way that meaningful things got repeated, not as a slogan, not as a motto, but as a reminder. A poi. Nt of orientation. A way of answering the question that every new crew member eventually asked, somewhere in their first year of service, when they looked at the scale of what had been built and wondered what it was all for. She had stood at the podium and looked at the people in front of her, the engineers and the commanders and the weapons specialists and the quiet analysts who had spent careers in rooms with no windows. And she had said, 47 of them are gone. 47 peoples who looked up at the stars and did not have enough time. She had paused. We had times we used it. She had paused again. They will not cross that line again, but we are not standing watch for the ones who tried. We are standing watch for every civilization in this galaxy that is sitting in 2346 right now, that has just seen a probe cross their outer marker and does not know what it means yet. She had looked at them with the directness of someone who had spent a lifetime meaning exactly what she said. We know what it means. We know how this story goes. And we will be here, we will always be here, so that when the time comes and they need someone to have already done the work, they can find us. We are still here. We are always still here.